All right, so good afternoon. This is Kathy Hoffman. I'm the Policy and Rules Manager with the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board. This is a follow-up to the first deliberative dialogue that we hosted with our processor producer panel on February 4th. And today we have joining us Charlene, Jeff, Danielle, Melissa. We are waiting for Dan and Tina to join us. Haven't come on board yet, but we haven't given up on them. So we're hoping that they'll jump on the call as soon as they are able. So during our first deliberative dialogue session, the panel discussion was very robust, and we weren't quite able to hit the last couple of questions that were posed to the panel, and there was a total of 8. And so today we're reconvening to go through our ideas and thoughts around question 7 that's imposed here on the screen, and then question 8 as well. And from my perspective, and I think the panels as well, these are pretty loaded questions, and we anticipate a robust dialogue today like we had on the 4th. But before we get into that, I'm going to do a roundtable with panelists who are here with us today, just kind of reflecting on thoughts and sort of feedback from our first deliberative dialogue session. So I'm going to start with Charlene, since I see your face first on my screen.
You can't see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you, yes.
Okay, I can't see anybody. I'm on my phone this time, so it's a different format. So
oh gosh. Okay,
I'm glad that it's fine as long as you can hear me and see me.
We can do both. And so if you want to, take as much time as you need, like maybe 5 minutes or so, reflections, thoughts, ideas from the first deliberative dialogue. So go ahead.
As far as thoughts or reflections from our first dialogue, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of it. I thought that was great, and I felt like it was all talked about that needed to be talked about, except these questions.
Sure.
So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Thank you, Charlene. Danielle, any thoughts for you?
Well, first of all, I have 2 small humans here, so if I'm on, like, that's my thing.
Yeah.
So I need you to just go find something else to do for right now. Thank you. For thoughts about the first one, I am obviously, we all know this is really complicated. I think we all want the same thing ultimately, but I think that trying to figure out how to get there in a way that is affordable, that makes the most sense, and that the least amount of people can negatively affect it is a challenge, which is why I think this is great. I am a big proponent and always have been of using the current WSDA contract in a random, to randomly enforce or check out the biggest producers and processors, specifically processors to start, because I think that you could get through the majority of the product in a year. I know that there are issues with that, but since that thing is already there, I know there's a lot of issues with that a lot of the public isn't aware of. It's there, and in my opinion, it seems like a easier step that could create a best practices switch within the industry without actually having to create more rules around making people do better. So that's my, I still think that's the easiest path of resistance at this point in time.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Real quick, it looks like we have a call-in user. Is that you, Tina, or is that Dave?
It's Dave.
Hi, Dave. Okay.
Hi.
All right.
Hi.
So just so you know, Dave, we're doing kind of a roundtable before we get into the questions, and we're recording right now. So I'm going to call on Jeff next, and then Melissa, and you can bring up the rear, okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave. So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed the first panel. It was great to be able to bounce ideas back and forth amongst the panelists and really have this rich discussion, and not just answering a question and submitting what your
Yeah.
statement. It was really kind of a back and forth, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I definitely want to echo exactly what Danielle was saying. The best way is to have like a real random pesticide test at the retail end, where the product is purchased from retail, and then the WSDA or some other entity. I really like the idea of the WSDA, and also see why there's some issues with that. There's not quite maybe the funding for that yet, but I would love to see something there. I think that's the way that we're going to get concentrates tested for pesticides, and really have really be sure that it's actually the product that is being sold because it was purchased at retail. So that's a big one. One thing I'll throw it out there, like that I would really love to see for test results for licensees. I would really love to see a system that, I mean, maybe it's the LCB maintains it, maybe it's somehow tied into Leaf, but I doubt that that's going to happen, because who wants to ask Leaf to do anything more? But I would love it if we could scan or type in the lot number of a retail product, and it would take that number and pop you up a COA for the consumer, so that everybody had that COA. It would take that away from the
Wow.
licensees as something that you need to do, and it would take it away from the retailers as something you need to do, because the state would have a system that ties it all together seamlessly. And so if I had a dream of how we could make that whole COA delivery system better, that would be it. The labs put the COAs onto the website or the portal or whatever it happens to be that the LCB kind of has control over, and then traceability links into that. So that's what I've got for the moment.
It's great to hear you say that, because in the consumer panel, that was an idea very similar to that emerged from that discussion.
That's a good
Where
idea.
somebody had like an iPad or something that had a list of products that they had, and all you had to do was like press on the product and it would pop up the COA. So yeah, there are some minds that are going that route, and I appreciate that feedback very much. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. All right, Melissa, your reflections.
Yeah, I again also want to say, thank you so much for pulling this all together. I thought that our last discussion was really great, and have no reason to believe that this one won't be. And also wanted to echo Danielle and Jeff about, within the parameters of the current, like trying to see how we could better utilize perhaps the current agreement with the WSDA. I know that I also was for the last dialogue. I did not know how expensive it was, and so that's something to continue to discuss and to try to work around or to figure out. And I mean, one of my biggest takeaways too from the last dialogue was just made me feel less alone. I think that especially with COVID, I've felt here pretty isolated, and so it's been pretty nice to hear that across the swath of various licensees that we're not alone out here, or a lot of people are still thinking the same things, and so that was also sort of a morale boost, which was really good. So I think I'm just really happy to have been a part of it and to continue to be a part of this dialogue. And I think that there's a lot that we could be doing, and I think that there's a lot of ideas that we could be harvesting from other licensees to figure out how to make things better for everybody, and including the consumers as well. So
Great, thanks very much. Good to hear that. All right, so Dave, calling on you now. Reflections, thoughts from our dialogue on the 4th that you want to share before we get started here.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I appreciate Kathy, your efforts in bringing us all together like this. And I think that this is a very positive process, and it's encouraging to see, a regulatory agency including all of us in this process like this. It's kind of unprecedented from what I know. Anyway, it was very productive, and I got some good feedback from some of the people who were listening in and participating, in the audience. So that's all great. And I'll also echo, people that spoke before me. I completely believe that our first line of defense, as it were, is the random testing at the retail level, and that is going to be expensive for the state, but I think that the state needs to recognize that we are generating a ton of cash for the state with this industry, and in fact we are taxed more heavily than almost every other legal state in the country by several orders of magnitude. And I think that it's only right for the state to bear the burden of that expense. And then, once the random testing at the retail level has exposed issues, then the state can go after, the details and actually find who the bad actors are and recover some of those expenses and weed out the bad actors, and everybody will be better off, including all of us who are doing our best to do the right thing in this industry, as well as all the consumers. The other thing that I just wanted to touch on is with regards to Jeff's suggestions about having the labs plug all the test results into a central clearinghouse so that the consumers can just scan their QR code and pop up their test results at home. This is something that I've been working on developing for my own company, is a system where the consumer can take our package home, scan it with their phone, and immediately go, be drawn to our website and learn about the product they just bought. And I think that the burden for that is probably going to fall on us to do individually. It's pretty hard for me to imagine that we could centralize that sort of thing. And the reason is because traceability is, for better or worse, broken. And I don't see the state doing anything to fix that anytime soon. We've kind of been in denial for the last few years about, how bad the decision was that we made to contract with MJ Freeway. And, it's easier just to keep going than it is to go back and fix the root of the problem. And so, I'm a little discouraged about that. But if in fact we ever do fix traceability, then it's possible that we could do it, in a sense, have a centralized system that exists as a repository for all of our test results so that consumers can access them that way. But, I do agree with Jeff that, it would be extremely convenient and, very educational for, all of our consumers if we had a system like that. Meanwhile, I'm as a private business owner, I'm moving forward with trying to create that for myself. So thanks again, Kathy, and everyone participating.
Yeah, great comments. Thanks very much, Dave. All right, so we are at 3:20, and I'm thinking we can go ahead and get started with question 7. And, since we're not in that formal, forum that we were in before, if you guys just want to answer in any order you want to, I'm not going to call on people. Is that okay? to just kind of take the formality out of it and let the conversation just kind of flow. And Dave, feel free to jump in whenever you want. Well, even though we can't see you, we know you're there. So just go ahead and insert your voice. That would be great. But I will read the question out loud because I know you're on the phone, all right? So let's go ahead and start with question 7 if everybody's ready. We all understand flower cannot be homogenized and potency of THC varies within the same plant. So any cannabinoid test will not be fully accurate for the entire lot. Do you support ranges of THC on the label? And if so, what ranges would you suggest?
So I'd love to jump in and be first on this one.
Do it.
Yeah, so I definitely support ranges of THC on the label. I think that's the most accurate that you're going to be. This is, the lowest test result, and this is the highest test result. And I believe that rather than having ranges that are kind of dictated like low, medium, and high, and extra high, or whatever you're going to have them be, I think that the range should actually be what the low test and the high test is on that. And alternatively, I also support having an average of those two numbers. I think that either of those would be much more accurate than what we have at the moment.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Do we need to have numbers on them? Like, I hear you, Jeff. I'm just curious, like, we run into this, higher is better. This number is better than that number. And so if we continue to have numbers on the packaging, are we negatively? And I think most of us would agree that the numbers are not, A, they're easy to manipulate, and B, you've also got terpenes that has a lot to do with the effect. And so trying to do that consumer education where it's not about the highest number, but rather around all of the components of the flower or product. And so if we just did an average and continued with numbers instead of a low, medium, high, are we continuing that consumer theory spending habits that they're going to go towards the highest stuff, thinking that it will become the highest?
So the one reason why I really support a range rather than having this having a low, medium, high is because I feel that people are really going to try to get into that high category. It's going to be the same thing, consumers that are looking for a high THC are going to look for the high category, so it's kind of like, if where are we going to make that cutoff? Is it going to be 20% and higher is high? If you've got a 19.9 testing something, you're gonna try your darndest to make it. I don't know. There's people that are already gaming test results to achieve high test results right now, and so I think that would continue. It wouldn't really do too much. But I agree with you. It's not all about THC. Terpenes are a huge part of it.
And here's part of my question too, is like, I feel like budtenders are usually very high consumers. And so the amount of times I've seen someone come into a store and ask that they're a new consumer and they want to try a product, and the budtenders give them something in the like 20s. Right? They're like, oh, this is only 20%. This will be good for you. And I'm like, that woman is never going to come back here again because she's going to be paranoid and mute in an hour and have a horrible experience. And so having that kind of low, medium, high then helps the consumer say, no, I don't want something in this high range. Like that, like as a consumer, I'd be like, I am not a medium and I am not a high. I need to be a low to start with. So I guess I'm just trying, I feel like we're losing a lot of potential market because of the budtenders. And that's not a blaming thing. It's just kind of who they happen to be. And how do we help retain those women between the ages of 40 and up, so that what the budtenders are communicating is also what the consumers are actually want. Does that make sense? That's why I like the idea of low, medium, high. Because as a mom, I'd be like, I don't want a medium and I don't want a high, at least not to start with.
There are others.
This comes back to the whole having test results really easily available to the consumers. So if the requirement was just to, have it be low, medium, high on the packaging, and then if anyone's interested in diving deeper into the numbers, then they can go to the test result. Then, that's a good solution in my opinion. But if we're not going to go to something like that, I totally agree with Jeff that the range should be the lowest and the highest.
That's assuming multiple tests per harvest still, right? And that I feel like all this is kind of up for debate right now, if we still need multiple tests per harvest or just an average or whatever. And
well, we need to be sampling, according to, generally accepted rules of statistics.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, think about when you're thinking about responding to this question, think about, I guess, what could be. So if you're thinking about this THC range, the potency, etc., does your belief rest on rules as they are now or as they could be? And I don't know if that's something you guys can think about, or if that's kind of too short notice about thinking about that, but I would offer maybe think about the rules that you would like to see in the THC range or state
Kathy, I don't think someone's muted and I can't hear you. It's kind of,
I know.
If you guys can mute if you're talking.
Dave. Okay, it was Dave. Sorry, Dave, I muted you. But I think that's something that we can talk about here, right? That assume a world without lots, or a different lot size, or something beyond 5 or 10 pounds. What would that look like? What would this question look like under a different or lot size of your dreams? I guess. I don't know how to say it.
Then the question is, do you need numbers or test results on this stuff? Like the LCB might, but I don't know if it'd be required in the packaging, because if I was an unscrupulous brand that wrote that it was really high THC, but it wasn't, then my consumer base probably wouldn't come back very often unless the price point was very cheap, right? It becomes a business decision instead of a regulatory issue.
Would it be possible to have cannabinoids as ratios then? Sort of, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Cannabinder. I'm not sure if they're still around, but they used to do this really cool, at least I thought it was pretty cool, CannaStamp, where it was specifically for terpenes, but it was essentially just like a visual representation of the ratio of terpenes in your lot. And maybe it would make sense to have something similar with cannabinoids in terms of maybe we would still say, high, low, medium, but maybe like perhaps ratios of cannabinoids could make sense in terms of indicating how, because people really just want to know how they're going to feel after they, use the product. And so if we could figure out a better way to let people know how they're going to feel. And maybe that's I don't actually know this, but perhaps it is a ratio, perhaps there is some sort of, commonality with, something that is, 2 to 1 CBD to THC or, whatever. Maybe a ratio might make sense in this context.
What about switching from cannabinoids to terpene profiles? And that's I'm throwing spaghetti on the wall here, guys. Is it both? Is it one or the other? Is it?
I think it's a combination of both, right? Because you could have these, really heavy indica terpenes and not the indica heavy effect if there's a lot of CBD in it, right? You're not going to be feeling that same thing as you would if those terpenes were modulated by the THC. So
I just back a little to that is that all of our most popular strains are high in CBG, right? So your CBD and your THC mean something, but the CBG is what pushes our most popular ones over the top that people love. And so are we even testing for the right terpenes to tell you that high? I'm sorry, test right cannabinoids. I'll stop talking. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Go ahead, Charlene.
I think Dave wanted to say something too. But.
Oh, sorry.
I think the range, if we are keeping numbers, because I agree with what was said earlier, is that the numbers, it's kind of like the whole Diet Coke thing, and it's misleading. I mean, we've got a lot of misled information in our food, so it makes sense that we're struggling with this in our cannabis. But with that said, I guess a range would be probably the easiest. But what keeps coming to my mind and why I wanted to jump in is that the final bridge with the bud tenders and the lack of training with these kids that are usually pretty high tolerance type lifestyles. I really think that needs to be looked at, and it needs to have more regulation because, like Daniela said earlier, somebody that's, shown a pack to a woman that's never had weed before and says, oh yeah, 21, no big deal, you'll like this, I don't even feel it. It's misleading. And it's an area, it's such an important area. It's that point of contact to the consumer. And it's incredibly unregulated. And it also is influenced with bribes, perks when they sell certain products. And all of that, I think, is a huge thing that needs to be put in check, and it needs to be regulated. So, but as far as the actual numbers, I think the range, if we are sticking with the numbers, would be the best case scenario.
All right, thanks. Thanks very much, Charlene.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, I'm trying to unmute you, and I sent you a request to unmute you, and I can't unmute you. Trying to.
So I can.
There you
Okay,
go.
so I can mute myself and unmute myself. I'm sorry, folks. I have terrible internet at home, and I'm so I just dialed in, and I will do my best to mute myself after each of my comments and only unmute myself when I have something to say. Just running around doing housework here. So it's helpful, I think, for us to remember that a lot of this obsession with the numbers is related to a couple of things. One is the old days of prohibition when, there was this, cannabis was so expensive, and, it was the same price whether it was, low quality or high quality, and everybody just wanted to get the best they could for their money. And, that sort of like mind frame has lived with us. And here we are, it's still really expensive for a lot of people. And, and so there's this impression that getting the highest THC possible per dollar spent is somehow, the best thing to do if you're 25 years old and, working for, $15 an hour or whatever. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is this is also a holdover from the fact that to some extent we're treating cannabis as if it can be measured the same way that alcohol can. And, in fact, that's not the case at all. And we're never going to really, solve this until we get to a point where the public understands that you could be really high in THC and smoke it and still be fairly clear-headed depending on the strain and the terpenes and all the other things that are affecting, all the minor cannabinoids and everything, or vice versa, and a lot of this is, we're going to learn a lot in the next 20 years as, access to research at universities opens up and stuff like that. And so as we're dreaming up the next step for this state, it'd probably do us well to remember that, this is going to look a lot different and need to be revisited again in another 5 or 10 years. And there's just a lot of things that we're not going to be able to completely fix right now. So anyway, I'll mute now again.
No, that's great. Great reminder, Dave. And I appreciate the, kind of infusing that into the conversation, that this is very much continues to be a work in progress. And I think, like a lot of other regulatory structures, this one is going to keep revising and revising. And we see that with the alcohol rules as well, right? That we've got a lot of experience with those. We've been working on them for 85 years. And we still are perfecting those, kind of flexing with changes in society, changes in consumption, places where those products are consumed, all those kinds of things. So yeah, they're always going to be sort of works in progress, for lack of a better word, I think is a fair way to look at it. So go ahead, Jeff.
I have a question that I wanted to pose to everyone is, like, does everyone on the panel, or well, I guess I'm looking for how you guys think about this, but do you think that the emphasis on, like, certainly it's, you know, like Dave was talking about the history of, you know, where cannabis, you know, the journey towards legalization, and like that emphasis on THC numbers. But do you think that also part of the continued emphasis on it has anything to do with, like, the fact that we're not technically allowed to talk about therapeutic effects and how people are going to feel? Do you think that's fueling sort of this emphasis on cannabinoid numbers?
Man, I'm really trying not to be first, guys. Come on.
Don't everybody talk at once now.
I definitely think the cannabinoid or the terpene profiles, again, you know, the general there's always a group that knows more and wants to know more. But generally speaking, I would say a person walking into a store is looking for, you know, to buy a joint or some flower to get high, you know, and to relax or whatever it is. And for the new people, they definitely don't want to freak out and go mute, as Danielle said. I love that. But it's, again, so often led by the bud tender, right? Like, so if we're going to do the cannabinoid or the terpene profile, we need to know that the bud tenders are able to lead these consumers in an educated experience, right? And not have it be led by anything else, but also educate the consumer in the moment, because most people are not going to understand cannabinoids or terpene profile until they're educated. So how do we do that?
Well, and I push back a little. I've been speaking a lot to DEA licensed researchers for cannabis, right? And what they are saying is that the anecdotal stories are obviously moving much faster than the real research. And so while we want our people to be educated, we don't have a consensus on what that education is yet, and it continues to change. And so we all kind of know our own anecdotal stories, and I would say that we know better than most bud tenders about a lot of these properties and things, but that still changes on a regular basis. Like, we're just maybe a year or two ahead of the bud tenders, and the researchers, that what we really want them to be teaching is, I don't know if what we're asking for is real, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if it's there yet. And if we're not there yet, how do we know, how do we simplify it into what we do know is that they are teaching things that are accurate at this point in time.
That's why I go back to the bud tenders.
I agree.
I think the bud tenders are really a big part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that.
Go ahead, Dave.
I think that, you know, if I was king of the world, I would get rid of the numbers completely. I wouldn't have a range on the package. I wouldn't have any numbers on the package. I would test it for pesticides and other contaminants and call it good, and let the consumers, you know, pick their favorite brands and try stuff. And I mean, just like we all do, try different strains, see what we like.
But that's where that whole, like, a first-time bud user, if they're like being suggested by a bud tender, you know, this is only 23%, it's good, try it out. That's where we could lose a consumer for life from a bad experience the first time. You know, we've all met that person that said, "Oh yeah, I tried weed when I was a teenager, you know, never tried it again." And it's like, we don't want to lose those people from a bad experience.
But we're losing them right now.
I mean, I agree, and that comes back to bud tender education. what that bud tender should be saying is, hey, it's your first time, take a half a toke.
Exactly.
Don't inhale all the way.
Don't
the numbers
inhale.
don't matter. Your
Or
first
try a
experience
1-to-1.
is,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Instead of
CBD
them
brings you
promoting a
down.
brand
Have
where they're
some
getting paid
CBD in
for it.
hand.
Yeah.
So that, like, Danielle put into the chat, do we really need to have a requirement for cannabinoids on the package? And I feel like it's very important to have cannabinoids on the package so that people can see if it's high CBD or high THC or an equal blend. And so, I don't think it's
Right,
as
that's true.
necessary to say 18 or 21 or 30%, whatever you want to have on the label as the THC. I think it's more important to say it's, a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 or whatever that is, because that's going to help the consumer that wants to have something that's less potent.
Yeah.
They're going to be able
A
to find
branding
it.
issue. That can be a branding issue where you decide as your company that on my, my CBD products or my 1-to-1s, I'm going to make sure I list this, that it's a 1-to-1, and maybe put, better for, newbies or however you decide to brand your packaging. That way, instead of having the state trying to regulate it and everybody trying to game the system. And bud tenders taking that number and making it like, we're not saying you can't put a number on there, just saying, is it really something that the state has to regulate and require?
Yeah. All right. Anything else? And thanks. And as this conversation goes, I'm pulling out all these other things. I'm hearing bud tender education is a big thing, and certainly that's something. Yeah.
Huge. I think they have to be watched more. It's kind of a wild card right now, and there's a lot of different factors leading this final point of sale that it should be more regulated. It's really a concern to me. And to other people.
There's another thing that I think have forgotten to add into this conversation right now. There is a place where the numbers really do matter, where percentages really do, and not so much percentages, but just like milligrams matter, and that is with edibles. And it's okay for us to treat different kinds of products differently. I actually eat cannabis more than I smoke it. And so it is, even though each person reacts differently, it is very true that eating it is something that is more measurable than smoking it.
That's true.
But
so
I agree with that, but even when you get into edibles, like getting that stuff homogenized and being within, whether it's 10% or, you know what I mean? Like, how are you making sure that is 10% or 10 milligrams? It can get.
Well, that's a conversation for a testing standards board. I mean, that's where the testing processes and stuff come into this, and it's kind of outside our purview in this conversation. I agree with you, though.
And we also need the numbers for the person that does want to get really, really, really high, right? Like a person that comes in and wants to get really high, they do need to see the numbers. Like that's where, we all know if the flower is harvested a little late, the potency goes down. And so I mean,
aren't they dabbing? If they want to be really high, aren't they dabbing?
You're right. Actually, they are. They've already left the flower world.
They're not doing flower anymore.
I'm all boomer, I guess is the terminology for my smoking habits. I have kids, okay?
Good. All right. Are we feeling like okay to move on to the next question? Anything we want to round out this conversation on? Great conversation. Playing out, just you're engaging in a way I totally expected you to, which is fantastic. That is great. Okay, so we'll move on to question 8, which really is more like 3-4 questions all put together. So Dave, for you, I will read it aloud. should pesticide remediation be wholly or partially prohibited? If so, how should we decide which contaminants we allow remediation of? How could we prohibit it without harming processors who are already strapped for cash, in part because of the high level of expenses already associated with ongoing pesticide failures, for which processors currently have very little recourse for seeking remedy from the producers who sold the contaminated product in the first place? So I know, Danielle, you and I have had a couple conversations in the past about this topic, remediation. So discuss.
And crickets.
It's a big question, I think. It is a big question.
It's not something I'm doing myself. I don't make oil or have oil in my product line. So to understand that's where I'm coming from. I do feel though, as a business owner and with the fellow business owners, that any opportunity for it to be made to be cleaned up and sent to market, I think is okay, right? Because it's like people that are buying cheap oil are fine with that level of quality. And if and it just, there is the technology there to clean it out and send it to market, or I should say that's my understanding. If that is true, I think that we should allow people to send it to market, like clean it and send it to market, because it takes away a lot of stress and loss of profits, which is a big problem with this. So that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
So yeah, I want to jump in here and say, I too agree that, although it's not what I want to consume myself, I think
Yeah.
that product should be allowed to be remediated. I'm kind of torn on what to do about it. So if you have something that's testing really hot for mycobutanol, right? That's an illegal pesticide, and like, I think we have a bigger question here than is it going to be safe for the end consumer, because it was produced in an illegal manner. And so I think that this kind of ties into, like helping relieve the harm that processors feel from getting contaminated material. Maybe there should be some sort of mechanism where it's, yes, you can remediate the product, but the LCB is going to do an investigation of the producer of said contaminated material. And so, like, if you test hot for it, there should always be an investigation that happens. Now there's got to be some sort of level for that, because the labs themselves are not perfect, and they give trace amounts of pesticides all the time when there's nothing there. And you ask them to rerun it, and the trace is not there. And it's drift from the previous tests that were in there. There's contamination still in the column, and so you'll get a trace of hot pesticide from whatever farm was tested before you. So I think that there's kind of this tough line, Yes, we should let the processors remediate, because they have, and we don't want to harm them, right? But there needs to be some sort of investigation that's going to happen as to the source of the contamination.
Especially when it's illegal.
Yeah, if it's illegal, if it's a legal pesticide, then there should be no investigation. It just happened to be hot when it's concentrated, which does not mean that it was, applied incorrectly. Applied correctly and have over the allowable limit of pesticides in it. As long as it's not a prohibited pesticide, then it shouldn't cause an investigation, and the processor should be able to remediate that product. As long as it tests clean, it should be able to be sold.
I agree with that.
This is Dave, and I have a lot to say about this. So we have had to learn how to do a certain amount of remediation just to pull our own feet out of the fire, because we've been burned, intentionally and unintentionally by so many producers, so many times. And there's a lot of processors who don't have quite the same business model that I do, which, started out as a service-based business model. And, because of the way that we operate, no matter how much due diligence I get, it's only it's only a matter of time before we have something go wrong. We have a project that goes badly. And so we have learned how to do a certain amount of this. And so while I have, on occasion done remediation projects on contract for other people who don't have their own facilities, I have never done so in a way that would reward unscrupulous producers for bad behavior. And I think that is kind of what Jeff's getting at, and that's where we need to draw the line. And I think that if somebody is growing with microbutanol, I think that they need to get shut down for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think that the product needs to be destroyed. I think that it's still of use to the market. And, and in fact, maybe the right thing to do would be to, for the liquor board to seize the product and pay a producer to do the work. And then, then the liquor board could insert the product back into the market somehow. I don't know. I'm just saying that
they could open their own brand.
There's a way there might be a way where situations like that could be used to further generate revenue for the state. Maybe it's an auction or whatever. One thing we have learned is that microbutanol is, far easier to remediate than pyrethrins, which are totally allowed. And pyrethrins are an example of a product which can be used in accordance with the label and still end up with massive fails. And they're really hard to remediate. So, it's just a massively complicated issue. And I think that what we need to do in order to ensure consumer safety after remediation is going to involve some new kinds of testing that the labs are not currently offering. And another thing that I want to say about this is that there's different kinds of remediation going on in the market right now. There is pesticide remediation. There's also color remediation. And that came about because there's an impression that has developed within the market where consumers believe that the lighter and brighter the extract is, the better it is. And that is kind of like the impression that the higher the THC is, the better it is. It's not always true. And yet that's what the market's looking for, which is, natural. I mean, we all want to buy pretty stuff, right? But people are doing color remediation with products that it's a pretty new process. People are not necessarily well trained in it. There are potential ramifications for consumer safety as well as for employee safety within the within the processing shops. So, I think that it's a huge subject that bears a lot of closer scrutiny, and that in order to avoid a situation where we just throw our hands in the air and say, okay, no remediation whatsoever, we're going to have to get into this more deeply. And, I would hope that that we could kind of ease into it and do it in a way that is good for everyone who's operating, with good intentions in this marketplace.
So, Dave, could I ask you a question real quick? And maybe this is to everyone. I think when Danielle, you and I started talking a couple years ago, you were in favor of the Oregon model, right?
I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So
Thank
you were thanks. Yes, thank you. So you were sort of in favor of the Oregon model where I think it was almost akin to, and I may be completely wrong, but like 3 strikes you're out, right? You get multiple chances to remediate under certain circumstances. And I think that process is still in place. Is that something that would work for folks? Is that an alternative that, you know, and again, I'm just thinking of all the things I've heard about in the last couple of years about remediation and testing, and is that still something that would interest people?
I think if
Smiling.
striking out from legal pesticides that were overused, then yeah. But if it's illegal pesticides being used, there shouldn't be a second chance. They have shown that they choose to not follow the rules.
Got it.
I can't be quiet any longer.
You did really good.
Let it out.
So I put it in the chat. So one of the things I think is a concern is that the producers hold all of the burden, and it has to be shown that they had applied it. And I think one of the possible solutions is sharing that burden between producer, processor, and retailer, and making it against the rules to sell products that are over the legal limit, because then there's no incentive. Like right now, the retailers have no incentive to not sell tainted product because it's not an impact to them. From a remediation standpoint, we have to look at intent. I would like to, in a perfect Danielle world, I would love to look at intent, and I would love to see a rubric around intent. So, you know, enforcement comes in and it's like, how welcoming is the farm to testing everything after a failed test? What kind of pesticides are seen on the farm? What are the test results of tested product from that farm? You know, what pesticides was it hot for? Microbutanol or pyrethrins? Can the failure be replicated? Like, there should be a bunch of steps to identify as to whether that this was malicious in intent or if this was overspray from the next farm over, because that is really, really different scenarios that I feel like should be handled very differently, especially if we're looking at remediation and saving a harvest. If it was not intentful, and we can do our best, you know, if we had a standard, we really want more rubrics to the LCB, we all know this. But if we can follow the same guidelines every time and show that this is how we've decided whether this was malicious or not, I just think that is really important when we're talking about this.
Absolutely, and you know, there should never be a situation where a positive for microbutanol results in an immediate license suspension. You know, I can't tell you how many times we've had microbutanol come up on a test and later be proven, you know, to be, you know, not present. And you know, it's a systemic pesticide that can live in the plant through multiple generations of cloning, and I've heard, I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard even through seeds. And it's a really insidious sort of thing. And, you know, and again, a lot of this all comes back to re-examining our action levels, you know, and research and stuff, you know, that we need to be really careful about making new rules right now, because, you know, we can accidentally harm people who are doing their best in the market right now really easily.
And Moberg brought up a good point at the last one where he said, what are the pesticide rules for hemp right now? And if we're going to see changes on labeling for hemp on a national level, can we adopt those for marijuana, for cannabis?
And I have a question. This is just a quick question, because we don't do any extracts or anything, but I completely understand, you know, the conversation around remediation with illegal pesticides, but what is the argument for not allowing remediation for over the limit allowed pesticides? I guess I don't know enough about this at all, so I just in general, like I just don't understand the other side of it, and I don't know if anybody can explain it to me.
want to take that?
Why is it all quiet now?
What is the argument against, or the argument for not allowing remediation for, say, for a concentrate that fails for allowed pesticides? So, for instance, like permethrin or something like that. Like, what is actually the argument for not allowing remediation for that? Because in the end, if we remediate it, I might not understand this very well, but it would not be present in the final end product, correct? And so what if it's clean in the end, what is the argument for not allowing the remediation process? Because quite frankly, to me, as someone who does not do this, it just sounds like an economic opportunity for some processors to get really good at remediation of legal pesticides and allowing another sort of business model for some processors.
Well, that would the next step. The next question from that is, why do we have action limits for concentrates for legal pesticides, but not action limits for concentrate or for legal pesticides for flower? Can you help us understand that, Kathy?
No.
Okay.
I'll take Melissa's question. And so this is a really good question, Melissa. And I'm not a proponent I'm not a proponent of prohibiting remediation, obviously. So what I am concerned about is a future for cannabis where the factory farming model has taken over, and billion-dollar companies are growing acres and acres and acres of a single strain, and they're all using myclobutanol because that's the easiest one to prevent powdery mildew. And the reason why they're able to get away with doing that and still sell in the market is because it's all going towards pen oil, and it can easily be remediated, right? That's not really that's a dystopian future for cannabis, right? I don't think any of us really want to see that.
Sure.
So
no,
that is a reason for concern about remediation. But I don't believe that we need to prohibit remediation in order to prevent that future. Does that make sense?
And that's where.
Yeah, that makes great sense. Thank you. Thanks for explaining that. That makes complete sense. Now I understand. Thank you.
And I have to just pipe up that would be that's a great example that Dave just brought up. I think that was Dave. I can't see anybody. But that testing at the farm at harvest level would shut those practices down, or at least be caught, and then they would have to change or be shut down. And that's, I think, where testing at the harvest, at the farm level, is essential, because it's the truth of it. It's like when it's being born, and then in the retail, when it's gone to market, there's such true points of what is going on.
So I gotta ask about that then, because you want, what it sounds like is you want farm level testing. You want testing of the plant, right?
The point of harvest, what we were talking about last time, harvest level testing, where people come in and they take random samples and test it
at harvest.
At the harvest, right?
Because I'm just thinking about like hemp and how they're running into issues with this, and how hemp farmers are making sure that they come in and do their harvest level testing as early as possible to make sure that the trichomes haven't been developed too much. Like I just started to see, like, you could start gaming that system really, really quickly, and we would be in exactly the same problems that we're having right now.
It has to be trichome rich. That would be the only way of really knowing what's going on. Yeah, it has to be when the plant's being. So you're saying they're harvesting early?
So the state comes in and the state comes in and tests hemp in this time period during harvest, right? Because the logistics of getting them there the day before harvest, when you've got hundreds of licensees, is just not realistic, right? And so they've got this window, and the farmers are pushing that testing to as early as humanly possible to make sure that they're under, especially, ideally they have genetics that don't let them go over that 0.3%, but if you Sometimes it's a plant and you never know what happens in the very end. So I worry that it's a great idea, but logistically, how does that actually work? And would we just not find ourselves in exactly the same situation here? I prefer end line product testing because I think that's ideally in the package, right? I think the hardware for concentrates is really important, especially if you're looking at heavy metals. That's in my world, that's what matters the most, because that is what the consumers are consuming, and the mission of the LCB is to promote public safety and trust through fair administration and enforcement. And so that's the piece that they're ultimately concerned about.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's just how do we catch the bad players? Like, to hear that it's known knowledge that these mega farms are using an illegal pesticide, but they clean it out in their final product. How do we shut that down? How do we stop that?
I mean, is that an EPA? Is that an LCB issue? Is that an EPA issue? Is that a consumer education issue? Like there's always going to be bad players. And so do we write rules that all of us are trying to follow that make our lives a living hell, quite honestly? Or do we accept the fact that there are going to be 5% all the time that suck and hopefully have some sort of leeway over here? Like, I don't even know if that would fall within the LCB's jurisdiction at the end of the day, if they're, especially if it's not one of these illegal pesticides, right? Like, there's certain ones, but I'm telling you right now, there are lots of pesticides the LCB isn't even aware of that people, I'm sure, are already using because it's not being tested as one of the ones from the WSDA or the ones that our labs are doing. So I don't know. I think that it's true. I think we could talk about all day how to catch the bad players and still get screwed, because unethical people are going to make unethical choices till the end of time.
Absolutely. It's just that these players are a huge portion of the marketplace. If they were smaller amounts of the marketplace, I understand there's no perfect world, but when it's a huge part of the marketplace and it's only getting bigger, then what are we really doing? Like, what is it really about? Where's the regulation? And like you said, what is it really about? Is it within the jurisdiction? But it's such a massive part of this market.
So Shirley, I'm going to follow up with you a little bit on that statement. Tell me how, when you say that this is pervasive, it's the dominant part of the market, is that a sentiment that everyone on the panel shares? And tell me how you came to that conclusion that they're, and I'm just curious how you came to that conclusion that this is I thought I heard you say this is kind of the majority of the market are applying these illegal pesticides. Yeah.
Well,
maybe I misunderstood.
It's a huge part of the market, like with these pens and these huge farms out in Eastern Washington that have multiple licenses and are only growing. And as it becomes legal nationwide, that is going to be the model. And they provide a large amount to the marketplace. So that's what I'm saying, is it's not some small craft farms. It's these huge farms that are pumping out. You would know better than I do how much product is coming out of these farms, but it's a lot. And so if they're making it a practice to use illegal pesticides to control these massive one strain crops, I mean, to me, that is it. That's a huge part of this market, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'd like to know. But and the idea that they just clean it out of their product and send it to market, it's not really legitimately regulating because they're not following the rules.
Can I jump in here? This is David.
Of course.
My impression is not that the illegal pesticides are being applied, rampantly by the largest producers in order to give themselves a market edge. I feel like that is a potential dystopian future that we should try to prevent. But I think that
our bigger problem that leads to situations that need remediation is simply action levels that are out of sync with science. I feel that pyrethrin and pyperonal butoxide are my biggest issue with, and those are allowed, and they are easily misapplied, and also can still result in a fail even after being applied with in accordance with the label. And I think that to some extent, it might be healthier for us to focus on those issues right now, rather than to just figure out, how do we punish bad actors versus, do we allow such and such practices or whatever. I do believe that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the realm of figuring out what the action levels should be. And I think that to some extent, we should leave the system alone as it is right now and just let people who have a business model where they have found that it is worthwhile for them to be Department of Health certified, let them continue to do so, and let everybody else follow the business model that they've already, found effective for them. And, just ask for more random testing at the retail level to look for bad actors. And meanwhile, really, really work on trying to, get more research and really looking at our action levels and looking at the actual things that are on the list. And that would probably be the most productive use of everybody's time.
I pulled up, this is a confidence analytics from November of 2017, so it's definitely dated at this point in time. But of all of the samples that they had done pesticide tests at that point in time, PBO and pyrethrins were the top two. So really what we're looking at, just like Dave says, is that it's the legal pesticides that are over action limits that are causing problems, which maybe if just like you said, just addressing that can alleviate a lot of the concerns that people are having as businesses. I don't know how that has to do with public safety, but from a business standpoint in pesticides.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in really quick and just answer Kathy's question. I believe that it's not a huge part of the market. There are large players that are definitely doing illegal application, and I tend to believe more like Danielle does. That's like the bad 5% or the bad 10%, whatever, some small fraction of what the growers are in total, rather than the norm. I personally, we don't process a ton of material for other people, but we've had one mycobutanol pesticide test that we had, and when I talked to the guy who grew it, he said, yeah, it actually was this neem oil that we got, and we ended up getting the bottle tested from the lab, and it nowhere on there said mycobutanol, but it actually had it in it. So they confirmed that they were basically getting a pesticide they thought was going to be legal, and it ended up being laden with mycobutanol.
Oh man.
So I think that that's a small portion of it. There's probably more people that are doing it the wrong way. I just don't know, and it really brings it back full circle to it's hard to say no, you can't remediate something if it has mycobutanol in it or an illegal pesticide, and so I think. Random testing is going to catch a lot of people that are trying to slip it through the system and just make it get it out to the market, and that's probably going to be our best way to assure that we've got a safe product for the market. And couple that with, you know, the LCB really following up with those farms. Like if there is a hot pesticide test that happens, enforcement needs to go out there and, you know, inspect the property, and maybe the WSDA needs to go out and be contract to take soil samples,
That would be it.
you know,
Mhm.
take a look at all the pesticides that are used on the property and see where it might be coming from. So
Yeah.
I
The
know in the
soil
past,
sample would tell.
I know in the past that the LCB has been concerned about what it would look like being very public with a recall at the retail level, right? That it just makes the industry look bad. And I feel like we're kind of past that to start. That's I think the industry looks pretty good these days after 7 years and being 2% of Washington's budget based on the taxes we bring in as a single industry. But also, if you look at like Oregon, you know, they send out these memos to all the news agencies saying this product tested hot and this is we are recalling it and blah blah blah. And so right now that burden, I feel like the LCB is not real excited about retail level testing because they don't know how to actually follow through with pulling all that product off the shelves, and traceability becomes an issue. But if you recall lettuce, the WSDA isn't responsible for making sure all that product comes off the shelves. The WSDA is just making sure that everybody knows that this needs to be recalled, and then it's up to the like good business practices. You don't want to get sued. It's our job to get our product back, and it's the retailer's jobs to pull it off the shelves. So I don't think that doing random samples at the retail level will negatively affect the industry, nor that there has to be necessarily a regulated policy in place in order to make sure that it all doesn't reach any consumers based on other industries.
Okay. And just to follow up on the question that you folks asked me, and again, if you guys want to put that in the chat, and I'll move it on to examiner's unit, because really when those kinds of questions come up, sometimes it gets into detail that I am not the agency expert and can answer the question, so I'm happy to do it. But I did want to say I have 31455 102 open right now, and this is 4C, that has to do with remediation. And it just says processors and producers may remediate failed harvest lots or batches so long as the remediation method doesn't impart any toxic or deleterious substance to the usable marijuana. So I don't know if that answers the question that you posed, Danielle. Does it?
I wasn't listening. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's all right.
Multitasking.
My first thought is, you know, that you can remediate from the board, and by talking to the board, and is there a rubric in place in order to determine what is and is allowed to be remediated, or is it just their feelings for the day? Because I would prefer rubrics.
Yeah, I think they base it on a criteria standard, but happy to follow up on that if you guys would like. Happy to. All right, we are at 4:18. I don't know about you guys, but that was a really fast, almost hour and a half. Anything, unless, you know, I don't know, Danielle, you're laughing. Did you feel like it was long? Okay, good. Anything else with respect to question 8 that you guys wanted to address? And then I wanted to bring up Danielle's couple of questions as well. All right, so we'll turn to Danielle's questions. I'm gonna pull them up on the screen here, and Dave, for your benefit, I will read these. But these were 2 specific questions, follow-up questions that Danielle posed to the panel, and part of the reason that we're here meeting today, so we can talk about these. But the first question was, knowing how expensive the WSDA testing is, what are your out-of-the-box ideas? Still want WSDA to test? How often? Every harvest? Once a year? Regularly, based on marketplace share? When the WSDA isn't testing, who would test? Just curious what you guys think logistics would look like. So in 10 minutes, can we tackle that question?
I wasn't listening.
In my perfect world, this is Dave. In my perfect
Yeah.
world, I think I would leave the WSDA out of the picture, except as a lab of last resort. I feel that it would be a giant burden for that agency to add, this kind of this level of responsibility to their already full plate. And I think that the private labs, are always going to be more well-positioned for this sort of an endeavor. And I feel that testing standards, being addressed, getting the labs to the point where they're all, working together and uniformly, even though they're in competition with each other, is something that really needs to be addressed, along with, as I've said again, action levels. And I think that to the real heart of your question, which is like, how often and how does, what are the mechanics of this and stuff. I feel that, it just needs to be a lot of samples mixed together, taken from many places within the farm each time that the farm is tested or pulled. Lots of samples mixed together to look for evidence of a problem, and then, further testing when such evidence does show up. And, again, I really feel that retail level testing is our first line of defense, and the mechanics of figuring out how to do the farm lot level testing, will come later.
All right, thanks. Thanks very much, Dave. Others?
Yeah, so I echo what I had said previously. I definitely agree that the retailers are of cannabis for the consumers, and feel like that's definitely the best location for testing to be done. And I feel that if it's going to be a randomized sampling, that those costs could be borne by the state and really give consumers a lot better protection from pesticides without increasing testing costs for processors. And I think that's really the most equitable location for pesticide testing to be done. It's not going to hurt the small guy, and the big guy is going to get caught just as easy as the small guy. So as far as the harvest or farm level testing, rather, not harvest level testing, I think that's also a great point where they can come in and they take actual soil samples and material samples and do a full battery of tests. But that doesn't need to be done every harvest, or it could be done on a random basis once a year by the WSDA. And it wouldn't be that expensive. It would be your kind of one trip expense for the year. And so that would be a way to still put the cost on the producers, but not have it be a huge cost.
Okay.
There's my
Great.
2 cents.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to throw in that when we talk about randomized sampling, that randomized, while it can be the, official standpoint, in business, random is never really random. If you have a lottery or a random drawing for a television you're going to give away for your business, it always goes to one of your best customers. That's just good business. And so as we talk about random sampling in an effort to take care of safety and consumer safety as the pinnacle, I think it's really important that those random samples become those that have the highest market share. They have the most money to be able to address it. It's going to help the most consumer safety. Picking the little tier 1 guy could put him under business, and he's really not doing that much damage, him or her, because of just his size. And so random should informally not actually be random.
Yep, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
That's a fair point.
That's why I was getting all jacked up about the trend. That's why I was getting so jacked up. I was getting so uppity about the big farms, is that their market reach is so great. So I agree with Danielle. It really should start from the biggest players down.
And we can do both. We can have an algorithm where the bigger your market share is, the faster the more often you rise to the top of the list to be sampled randomly. And so, the sampling itself is random, but, the frequency of sampling could be relevant to the size of the market share.
Which is all an internal LCB thing, doesn't need to be made public at all. In my opinion, I don't know how government actually works, but...
Be public, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, having it skewed out. So if you've got more concentrates that you're producing, you get more sampling. Like a processor only, they're going to be getting it from lots of different farms. So if you just say, oh, well, we're taking one random sample per year per licensee, that's not really going to catch the problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the goal is ultimately for the industry to create best practices to maintain health and safety, not to be regulated to maintain health and safety. And if you catch the biggest guys, then they're going to create internal policies and procedures that make sure that all 50 feeder farms they're buying from are following these protocols so they don't get busted again, because it's a logistical nightmare, an advertising nightmare. Oh, did we scare her away?
She said she was going to step away for just a second.
What do you guys think about, Dave was the one that brought it up first, but producer processors being required to have something scannable so that people can cover the COAs? Because that's useless.
I think it's a great idea. I actually put that QR code on my package. Every single package has has a QR code, and it goes to a page where you can download the COA, so you can get the actual PDF and hold it for yourself, and really know what is in there, and really see that there's non-detect on all of the pesticides. And I don't know if I like that as a requirement. We do it as a best practice. So.
Do you do it on your joints too? Because joints are always the one that have zero real estate available.
That is a really good point.
It's a tough label.
You're right. That's
a tough label.
Point. Yeah.
But we do. Yes, we've got a QR code on every single joint, and some people. Nick Mosley actually was telling me he couldn't scan our QR code on the joint, but I can scan it no problem with my phone, and he figured it out. He actually got it to work. So.
Really?
Yeah,
so even though it's wrapped on the tube, it's still scannable.
Yep, you've just got to have a small enough QR code. So yeah.
And Jeff, that's the same one that the store is using to scan it, right? It's not.
No,
it's not an extra add-on to the barcode it's in place of the barcode.
Yeah, so we actually have a barcode for the lot label, or for the lot number, and then we have an additional QR code on there that goes right to, it's kind of a landing page that has all the leaf data for the test results, and you can click on a link there that gives you the COA.
How big is your tube? Do you have like the tube?
Standard joint tube, yeah.
The bigger one, yeah.
Yeah, well, just, yeah, the standard one that fits, 2 half-gram joints or 2 full-gram joints you can fit in there.
That's super great, Jeff. Like that's just, it's
98
great
millimeters.
packaging, it's great marketing, and making sure that you have that transparency to your consumers. That's awesome.
It
Yeah,
is. That's
yeah.
really cool.
All right, well, thanks for carrying on the conversation, even though we're having a conversation. This does not stop the UPS man from coming by and your dog's going ballistic. So I appreciate your graciousness during that little step away I had to make. So thanks very much for that. So we are at 4:30. Don't want to impose on anybody's time any more than we already have. Are folks feeling okay? Danielle, do you want to go to your next question here?
I mean, I'm just curious, but I don't want to take anybody else's time either.
Multitasking.
Yeah. Weigh in with the group before we sign off here, but probably another 5 minutes. Is that okay with everyone? Maybe so. Okay. So Dave,
I'll
for
make it.
you, the additional question from Danielle was, it sounded like everyone on the panel tests for pesticides every lot or at least every harvest. Why not spend $70 for heavy metal testing per strain, per harvest or batch to make it DOH compliant? So that was the final question from Danielle. So thoughts on that?
The biggest
you
reason
ever
for
had
us,
a batched fail? I'm sorry, Jeff, I got in there before you. Danielle, have you ever had one fail?
And she's shaking her head.
Because I just realized you couldn't see me. No, I haven't.
I was going to
So
say
that's why
basically
I've
the same thing.
Not
Yeah.
been doing it.
Yeah, it's because it's
That's
the
my
additional
answer.
cost every lot for something that we've tested our hemp for heavy metals because that's a requirement to bring it back into the 2 system. So we know that we're not testing hot for pesticides, I'm sorry, for heavy metals from that one. But we've never done it because the common thought process is that if you're growing in soil, you're not gonna, we tested the soil and there's no lead or heavy metals in the soil before we ever planted any cannabis at the farm. And so we're throwing money at the labs every single test result to give them, to basically get this clean bill of health every single time, for us seems like a little bit more of an expense than we want to put out there. It's definitely worth it for us to do the pesticides because we can kind of say, hey, we're clean of pesticides. We've tested our pesticides, and that's kind of a really big issue. But I feel like the heavy metals aren't really as big of an issue. That being said, I definitely agree. When you get into like the vape carts, there is more of an issue with heavy metals. So, it's something that could be better for the consumers if people did test at that level. But I think flower, it's kind of, I don't know. I would actually really like to see any data that the LCB has on heavy metal failures, just to see where we're at as a state. Like the people that are testing heavy metals, are they finding anything? Because Danielle says no, and I haven't actually heard of anybody that has failed personally. So,
and I'm waiting on the cartridge manufacturers, when it comes to the cartridge side of things. And and that all again comes back to research and development of testing techniques. I'm unaware of a lab in this state where I can send a full cartridge and have them do a vapor test for heavy metals. If there is such a lab, with that capability, I'd like to try it out. I would absolutely voluntarily send my products there. You know, but you know, that's kind of like different from the conversation we were having. So thank you, Jeff.
I feel like within our testing range right now, I agree with what was just said. It'd be nice to see the data to see how much of heavy metals is actually an issue, because I have no idea. I have no idea where that's at. But just, I mean, what brings us together is about consumer safety, and heavy metals are super dangerous for the human body. So why aren't we testing for heavy metals and pesticides? Like, if it's really about consumer safety, heavy metals and pesticides are so much more important than the THC level. You know, it's like a person's walking into the shop to buy weed, they're going to get high. So that's understood. But pesticides and heavy metals, that is our responsibility to keep the consumers safe, including like anyone that does smoke within the industry. All of those people want to know that they're safe. So instead of another test, I feel like it's one of those things that we need to look at what we are testing and maybe put it together differently. Because as a very, very small farm right now, the idea of an additional $70 per strain is a lot for me. It's a lot. And so it's not that I don't believe in it, but to actually implement that practice, I really can't shoulder that.
So, and I just want to be clear that it's per strain per harvest, right? It's not per strain per lot, it's per strain per harvest. And so per strain per harvest, you guys, there's no added, what I hear you saying is that there's no added benefit for your brand in order to add that additional, and maybe you, who knows, there's a lot of different reasons why, but there's no additional added benefit for your brand to incur a $70 test per strain per harvest. Or per batch, whichever.
I think it's absolutely beneficial, and it's something I deeply believe in, right, for the safety of consumers. However, like this last year, my crop had multiple strains. I had a lot of different flavors because it just happened to be that I sourced a lot of different flavors, or strains. So there, even for per strain, I still had, that would have been 7 times 70, right? You know, and it's, again, it's not that I don't want to do it. It's that shouldering that cost additionally on top of other stuff would make it more difficult for the small farms. So why not create the structure of our existing tests to include the pesticide and heavy metal instead of the THC percentage? That's my hit on it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and you know, I just want to throw in, you know, we grow at least 20 different varieties every year, and so that alone would be $1,400. And I mean, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but when you know you're in this industry, you know how hard it is. You know, you've got to pinch every penny that you can, and so $1,400 is quite significant. So. And for other producers that are doing it indoor, it's going to be even more expensive because they do 4 times that amount of harvesting. Maybe they're not doing as many varieties, so their costs could be a little bit lower in that sense. But yeah.
Yeah, same here. As a processor only, you know, our batch size could be as small as, you know, 150 grams of a single concentrate. And at that level, my testing cost is already over $1 per gram in many cases, because, you know, I have to use 2 different labs and, you know, all this stuff. And so for me, it's just not even an option. And, you know, if we're going to do it at all, it needs to be at the plant level, I think. And then again, at the finished product level.
Okay.
You know, and when I say finished product, again, I'm talking about the, you know, a vapor test from from a cartridge that was, a filled cartridge.
Sure.
So, we just don't know enough about how the oil is interacting with the hardware.
Okay. Melissa, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to quickly say I hadn't come across, like, when I was doing my very quick research on heavy metal testing, I didn't come across it being only $70. I came across it as a lot more. But it is something that, I think certainly now that you've brought that to my attention, Danielle, we already do a, annual pesticide test. We might as well do an annual heavy metals test. So thank you for making me aware of the fact that it can be a lot less expensive than I anticipated.
Well, and my thought process was simply because the patients are like, why don't we have more DOH product? You see the LCB push for that. And so if you're doing an annual pesticide test, an annual heavy metal test probably isn't going to help you that much. But yeah, I think that, like you guys said, I think it comes down to cost. And what I'm hearing you say is that the $70 per strain per harvest or per batch is just too much. And that the logo sucks, the DOH logo sucks, and nobody knows what it means anyway. So there's no added benefit if you actually do it.
And yet it's so important.
Yes. Can be. I mean, we do it from a brand standpoint, but people know that Puffin is clean, right? People know that certain products out there are clean, and so it really, if you're not getting added consumers because it's medical, then because it's certified medical, then what's the benefit of actually doing it?
That's the right thing.
Enrichment for the labs, they get more money, and that's kind of where I've always been, so.
Okay. So I think we're at a good place to conclude today. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up and add it to our other recording, which, by the way, we could have those up on the Outward Facing website if you want to take a look. And hello, Danielle's daughter. It's good to see you. So nice that our lives are still happening while we're doing this, right? But yeah, I wanted to share that, and we will upload this. We figured out how to do that pretty rapidly now. It took us a few weeks to figure it out, but we did. Any parting comments before we sign off, and until we meet again?
Thank you for the opportunity. It's
Absolutely.
really, really an honor, and it's great to learn. I appreciate all of you on the panel, and I learned some good things today, so thank you very much.
Excellent.
And thanks for the variety, Kathy, of people we don't always hear from and all the different sizes. And I just think that it's really great to hear different perspectives that don't necessarily haven't been jaded by associations, which I get to, for me, I get to talk about trailblazing and not about an association, right? What I want. So it was great hearing from all of you guys.
Oh, good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah,
Well,
great.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's all
I
sizes on this panel. I am sitting here trimming my weed right now. I'm small. So thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Dave, did you want to say something?
Nope, just echoing the same stuff. I appreciate this opportunity and appreciate all of you, and call on me anytime.
Will do. All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Thank you to you all. You can stay and hang out for a couple minutes while I do, downloading the recording, the chat, all that stuff, if you wish, or feel free to jump off. So again, we really appreciate your participation in this process and the gift of your time to the community. It's really helpful, and we're glad that we're able to engage with you in this way, and hope this is the second of many more to come. All right.
Kathy, for those of us that wrote notes for all the questions, do you want those? I mean,
if you feel compelled to share them, please do. Okay. I will never turn down anybody's notes. But, you know, again, if you feel like you want to keep it, it's up to you. I'll let that be your call, okay? Right. Thank
I accidentally
everyone.
deleted mine.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.